shaping up on the trade front in 2022? Lee Smith is an attorney and leader of the international trade and security practice of Baker Donelson. Hi, Lee.
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
Good, and thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me on this very crucial issue for importers and exporters these days. So which issues relating to international trade are creating the biggest concerns, the biggest uncertainties for importers and exporters right now?
There's so many things going on right now, and I kind of sort of advise people saying that, the international trade waters are pretty choppy these days, and they have been for a little bit, and they're going to, remain choppy for some time. And essentially, I advise people to, expect continued action from the current administration and Congress on a number of issues to ensure, to make sure that you're being covered. And perhaps probably one of the main important issues is, really just, due diligence. Know where your items, your inputs are coming from, and who are your downstream suppliers, where are they located, and think a lot about that, and think about whether or not that makes sense, or if or if where they're located and where they're coming from is too much risk.
Yeah. So policies, are there certain regulations and policies that we should be thinking about that are actually triggering this necessity to review your supply chain and perhaps contemplate a change of sourcing and trade patterns?
Yeah, one of the big things that I saw over the last, frankly, two administrations that are continuing is, national security and economic security are really now intertwined and will continue to be. International trade policy plays a big role in both of those. So there's your question is very broad, and so there's two things to really to discuss, and it kind of falls under both national security and economic security. One, you're seeing a lot coming out of Congress and the Biden administration on the Xinjiang issue and forced labor in China. That's having some pretty significant issues with respect to items that's sourcing cotton from the area, and more specifically, items that include polysilicon or silicon items such as solar cells, semiconductors, making sure that you don't have product from that region or specific companies targeted in that region in your supply chain. And, people perhaps have heard of the actions that have been taken so far, but there's the Rubio bill in Congress that could potentially have a rebuttable presumption that everything from that region in China has forced labor. Mm-hmm. And then there's sort of the mid-range action where the Biden administration wants to continue taking action on companies or industries there that are using forced labor by putting withhold release orders on them, or perhaps entity listing the companies and putting them on the government blacklist, or even perhaps sanctions are an option too. So I expect things to happen there, and that's kind of in the national security type of space. But then we talk trade, also national security space. The Biden administration is looking at a 232 investigation on rare earth magnets, and the result there could be a number of results potentially coming out of that investigation, and that's just getting started. And there's also talk in Washington about a potential 301 case on industrial subsidies in China, and that likely, sort of the thinking around that is that will potentially raise tariffs on some products, but then perhaps lower tariffs on other products that were caught up in the intellectual property Section 301. So the Biden administration would use the Section 301 new investigation to sort of put their imprint on potential tariffs from China.
I see. The Biden administration has not hastened to bring down the tariffs that the Trump administration imposed. As many of them are still in place. Do you think that some of them you're suggesting that at least some of them might be relaxed next year and others might be imposed, but in either case, we're not going to see an end to tariffs on imported goods from China anytime soon, right?
Yes, that is my take. I don't think, first, I don't think politically there is a lot of space for the Biden administration and Democrats in general right now to sort of be soft on China, and removing those tariffs would regardless of the policy decision, would give that impression. And in any event, I don't think the relationship outside normal just U.S. politics, I don't think the relationship with China right now is at a place where the Biden administration, or really any administration, would be interested in giving them favors. And by virtue of the structure of the Section 301 law, the Biden administration will need to conduct a new investigation, and then based on that, then they would have the ability to change the tariffs however they see fit, like take some up, put some down, tariff new items. And I frankly, sort of to continue on that line, I think the focus on Congress, on the Biden administration and Congress's focus on the supply chain issues, reshoring the Biden administration's 100-day supply chain plan. I think if they were to take action under Section 301, it would really reflect a lot of the goals sort of outlined in that plan. So I think the Section 301 could potentially the Biden administration would use that as a policy tool to forward those desires.
What other issues that continue to rankle that we might see continued, like our concerns about China's intellectual property protections or lack thereof? Where might that go in the year ahead, and what might be the impact of that?
I'm not sure there's much more that can be done. Much can be done in terms of the United States dialogue with China on intellectual property, asking China internally to do more to protect intellectual property. China, shoring up its legal system to ensure more intellectual property protection. But the United States did the Section 301 on intellectual property, made its decision, it imposed tariffs. I don't see the USTR raising tariffs for intellectual property any more than they are already doing. I do believe that the Department of Justice, DOJ, and the FBI is going to continue with their focus on China intellectual property theft and other Chinese related issues, to the extent there is criminal activity there, and go and file criminal charges to the extent that the facts warrant it.
What do you expect will be the administration's ongoing attitude toward the conclusion of free trade agreements, multilateral versus bilateral, and which types of agreements do you think we're going to put emphasis on joining or not joining, for that matter?
That's a great question. So first of all, one thing that I've been noticing USTR Thai doing, which I think is very creative, is they're negotiating the Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum with the EU and Japan, and they're moving towards more of a quota system, tariff rate quota system, and sort of ensuring that Chinese steel isn't getting in there. But what I think is most interesting is that they're sort of tying in climate change related issues in those agreements. And I use that as an example as kind of the creative way that USTR and this current administration is looking at different types of agreements, different types of relationships with partners. So, and I also add, the AUKUS agreement. I'm not sure I'm going to hedge that this current administration is going to go in head first and start negotiating free trade agreements early next year with partners, or try to join existing free trade agreements or multilateral agreements right now. But they clearly are, doing exactly what we expected the Biden administration to do, as opposed to the Trump administration, which is engage more with allies, engage more in these types of talks, and trying to work together. I as a practitioner, I don't see it as too crazy that both the EU and Japan agreements were sort of came on Section 232 duties on steel and aluminum, kind of came closely after each other, because it feels like the Biden administration is trying to sort of build a coalition with those two countries, the trading blocs, and that's sort of the first step along those lines.
Yeah, but also a strategic move on the part of the United States to position itself as a powerful voice in, say, Asia against China, perhaps rejoining the renewed version or the revised version of the Trans-Pacific partnership or something like that? I mean, do we see us as using that as a geopolitical tool in order to give ourselves more voice in Asia?
I don't disagree with that. I do think it potentially makes sense to consider joining, but just as a practical standpoint, I'm just not hearing anything about that going on. I think that's something that may come up next year or be discussed next year, but I don't see any movement happening in the near term in the next few months for sure. There's too many other issues that the Biden administration is trying to address.
But it does seem like we're trying to shore up our relations with our traditional friends by eliminating the aerospace dispute with the EU and turning our attention to the disputes with China, trying to strengthen our position in Southeast Asia as well as Asia. So are we seeing indeed that's where the attention will be focused, do you think, in the year or two to come?
I think so. I mean, and that's kind of going back to the point, national security, economic security are intertwined.
Yeah.
We're focusing on our allies, trying to build relationships there, though, query whether or not, well, I will say this, I'm not joining, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is going to, or what it is now, takes a lot of time, and it's a big endeavor. And frankly, I think the Biden administration is going to try to focus on, actual wins instead of a long, drawn-out negotiation process that might not even get completed within the first 4 years of his first term, and then potentially wouldn't be able to be completed if he didn't get reelected or something like that. I don't see it being a priority at the moment.
Yeah. So our takeaway for international traders, especially U.S. importers and exporters, as you say, is to get to know your supply chain and give yourself the options that you need to have at hand in the event that any of these things materialize or don't materialize, right?
Yes. And in addition to that, know your supply chain, but also consider perhaps, for either as the terminology, reshoring or foreign direct investment into the United States as part of your supply chain thinking. I've been helping a number of clients on a variety of issues related to supply chains and tariffs and potential changes. Like, for example, the auto industry, new USMCA rules are coming into effect, and companies that previously were importing merchandise into the United States might lose their contracts with U.S. manufacturers because they're going to turn that contract to someone in the United States that can get U.S. country of origin, because the country of origin, or USMCA country of origin, because the country of origin is going to go up for automobiles overall. So companies are considering, if I'm not in the United States and maybe they're going to cut my product out because this item is not as important to the whole car, and they can get it sourced in the United States to increase.
Or you could be in Mexico. You
or Mexico or Canada, for sure. Absolutely, for sure. For sure. And to invest in either the United States or our neighbors. And then similarly in the automobile industry, with respect to supply chains and a lot of the stuff that the Biden administration and the Democrats in Congress are doing, there's a lot of incentives for the manufacture of electronic vehicles in the United States, for the purchase of electronic vehicles in the United States. So, that goes into both, auto manufacturing and the downstream industries, such as, batteries.
Yeah, assuming you can find the rare earth materials in order to, we go back to that whole problem.
Absolutely.
That's a discussion for another day.
And that absolutely goes into it, because the 232 on rare earth magnets, it's used in military applications, but it's also used in electric vehicles and in computer components. So it has it affects both the civil and military side, for sure.
Okay. There are just so many issues we could talk about here, Lee, that would occupy us for several very happy hours, but unfortunately we don't have that kind of time. I'd love to talk to you again and pick up this discussion in the new year, but in the meantime, I want to thank you so much for helping us understand what are the big issues that international traders and U.S. importers and exporters are going to be looking at in the year to come. Thanks so much for being with me.
Thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate it.